Today's ninth session on the grief and bereavement literacy is titled Teen Grief, Responding, Rebuilding, and Relearning. And so let me introduce you to our presenter. So today we have Trevor Josephson, who is a registered clinical counselor, also an approved clinical supervisor, and holds an advanced diploma in art therapy. His belief in the healing power of an individual's personal imagination and creative spirit is affirmed daily through the work he does with people of all ages and backgrounds at the Peace Arch Hospice Society. So since 2012, he has been honored to be a companion to people during the end of life and bereavement journeys as they explore and express the meaning of their experience. So as I said today, he's going to have an educational presentation, and then please write down your questions either in the chat or just by you, and we'll have time for you to ask him. And so it's my pleasure to hand over the session to Trevor. And I think we're also going to do a poll right in the beginning just to rate your current knowledge of today's topic before he goes into explaining what he knows.
Well, thank you very much, Joshua, and thank you to the BC Centre for Palliative Care for inviting me here for this presentation. Thank you to all participants for joining today. I have feels like a good chunk of time to cover this topic, but there's a lot to cover in it, and I'm going to be covering a lot of material in somewhat a quick manner. So if you find that it's going a little bit too fast, I will certainly answer questions at the end, or I will be available also if anyone that wants to reach out to me some other time to ask any questions. I am especially happy to be able to present on this topic because I think it is so incredibly important when it comes to children and teens, as we're going to explore here in this presentation today. When they're grieving, it is especially important to acknowledge the struggle that they go through that is different than how adults grieve. Today, we're going to talk about how we can learn to better respond supportively to teens who are grieving and understand how teens themselves respond to loss. We're going to understand the personal process of relearning. That is part of the grief experience for teens. Some of this will have to do with what's going on inside of them personally, inside of their brains. And we're going to build awareness of how teens engage in rebuilding a new life for themselves after a loss. Here's a picture of an adolescent that I found, and I went back to try to find out where I found it. So my apologies for not properly citing it, but it does highlight some of the main aspects of teens that we think of on the surface, the transition from childhood to adulthood, teens having a strong natural preoccupation with appearance, an intense and variable emotional states, a lot of emotional upheaval that we see happening in adolescence, and a high need for support and acceptance that they have, that sense of belonging that's very important. Certainly those probably come to mind for most people when they think about teens. I'm not sure what suspenders element is here on the style of the teen. Maybe that's a style I'm not quite aware of, but I thought that was interesting that this picture of the teen is wearing suspenders. So let's start with the definition of teen. Typically recognized as the teen years are between 13 and 19 years of age. That's what most people might note. But the American Psychological Association says that it can begin as early as age 10. And some aspects of adolescent development often continue far past 18 or 19 years of age, even up to 21 or 25 years of age. Also, the World Health Organization notes that it could be as early as 10 years of age, going up to 19 or higher. So we do see that there is flexibility on the two end ranges there. But what we want to always consider is that chronological markers are not accurate indicators of the developmental stages. So we can't really say that every 16-year-old teen is going to fall within the middle range of adolescence and they're going to have these aspects that they're struggling with, that all 16-year-old teens are the same. Age provides only a rough marker of adolescence. So we have physical, psychological, or cultural expressions that may begin earlier or end later. So I think that's something that we always have to be mindful of when we're talking about teens. So being a teen, what is that all about? I think right away we designate that as it's that in-between period, that what I like to call liminal space. You're no longer a child, you've left childhood behind you, but you're not yet an adult. You're looking forward to adulthood. So you're in this in-between space that takes place over a number of years. We're talking about identity formation. A person is discovering themselves as an adult. They're defining what that means for them, and how do they fit into the world as they are emerging into adulthood. Aversion to feeling vulnerable and dependent. There's a really interesting quote that I like to use from a book written by Mary Percy. The book is called Helping Teens Work Through Grief. This is how the quote goes. I want to walk the tightrope alone, but if I lose my balance, I might need you. I don't want to ask you to stand by me, but I want to know that you're here. Just don't make a fuss if I fall, because I'll already be embarrassed enough about messing up. So kind of the sense of the teen walking that tightrope. I really like that image. So the teen brain under construction, we've all heard about what is going on inside of a teen's brain that might contribute to some of their confusing behavior. That might seem confusing to adults. It might seem erratic. It might seem extreme in some ways. So what we do know is that there's what we call synaptic pruning taking place. This is done to make the brain more efficient through the reduction of unused pathways. So very interesting when you think about areas of development that are no longer needed, that the brain is starting to, well, divest itself, if you will, of those neural pathways. A lot of work is being done through that. And this leads to better evaluation of risks and rewards, as well as improved control over impulses. But again, this is all under construction. So you can imagine anything that's under construction, there's going to be moments when it's a little bit wobbly or less secure, or, oh, maybe we have to do this instead of that. So there's a lot of work that's being done. And I think we need to remind ourselves that there's a lot happening inside of the teen brain. Changes in the levels of dopamine and serotonin make adolescents more emotional and more responsive to rewards and stress. And this creates a vulnerability for teens. So as they're more emotional, they're more sensitive to rewards that they will respond to, that they might seek out. This can lead to perhaps risky behavior, risk-taking. And we certainly have noticed that many of us, if we think about, oh yeah, I know some teens in my family or my social circle, or even looking back to our own adolescence, some of that we might be reminded of some moments like that. And what we call immaturity, I put that in kind of quotes there, is actually a cognitive, behavioral, and neurological flexibility that allows teens to explore and adapt to their shifting inner and outer worlds. So let's not call it immaturity. Let's look at this as the brain is really working hard. It's really finding out how it's going to evolve and develop into this adulthood. And I think it's really important that we look at what we call the myth of the inevitable storm and stress of the teen years. I use this image of the teen wolf figure here. Sometimes teenage years have been referred to as the werewolf stage of human development. I think that's unfair. And I think that it's unfair that it's labeled as being a very stormy and stressful time. What we find is that cross-cultural longitudinal research indicates that there's actually a relative calm and peace that mark adolescent development. So kind of contrary to what we may believe. However, there's 20% of teens that will describe their lives as filled with personal chaos and interpersonal struggles. These are probably the ones that come up to the surface more, to the public's attention, perhaps, and then therefore kind of have us believe that the teenage years are the most volatile or the most chaotic. But what we find is maybe that's a smaller portion of teens. At least that's what research shows that teens report. But we have to be mindful that death of someone in a teen's life is a crisis that can also be an opportunity for learning and growth. We're going to be looking at a lot of different ways that a teen is affected by loss, but we're also going to give a lot of warrant to the fact that it is an opportunity for learning and growth for a teen. Coping with bereavement during adolescence can lead to greater maturity, not only regression or disturbance. So I think it's really important that we really understand that teens can draw upon resiliency. And in some cases, they say that loss helped them to proceed more quickly towards adulthood than their peers. Now, let's look at the impact on teens that grief can have. The most stressful event in the life of a teen is the death of someone important to them. So very, very profound impact that the death of a loved one can have on a teen's life. There tends to be a higher long-term risk of mental health problems, attempted suicide, violent behavior for teens who lost a parent, as research has shown. Grieving, self-blame, disruptions in relationships, depression, and risk-taking behaviors, and even suicidality. Grief resulting from death is what we could see as a dangerous opportunity that could lead to growth and maturity if responded to well, or if responded to poorly. That we as a community need to put towards supporting teens who are grieving. And the research does show that if they are supported, if space and available supports are given to them when they're grieving, there will be positive outcomes, but if the resolution of the developmental tasks that teens experience. And let's take a look at what some of those tasks are, and specifically how teens are affected by it. I think it's important to note that statistics show that 5% of children in Western countries are liable to lose a parent before high school graduation. So it is probably a bigger number of people in our community that experience loss than we would probably assume. So in early adolescence, there's what we call the emotional separation from family members. Okay, I see that when this is happening, there can be an incredible amount of guilt when a family member dies. They remember choosing to spend more time perhaps with friends instead of with that person. And that's part of their normal development. They're starting to pull away from their family unit as they need to do in order to establish their own identity in the world away from their family. But when a family member dies, they might reflect back on that and think, gee, I should have been there more. I should have spent more time with that person. I see that happen a lot with teens. In the middle adolescent development, which is roughly between the ages of 14 and 17, this is a time of developing autonomy, forming a distinct and mature identity. So we're looking at the task of mastery and control here. But when someone dies in a teen's life, it can underscore the reality that they can't control everything, especially what is most important to them. And they can't always feel competent They can't feel like they have mastery. And at a time in their development when this is really important for them, and this is the main task for them, this could be very compromising. And in late teen development, between 17 and 21 years of age, this is a time that teens are achieving a stable character formation, a sense of their sexual identity, gender identity. So we're talking about intimacy and commitment to others. So their attachment security might be compromised when an attachment figure dies. And of course, there's a lot of factors that go into that. We're going to look at some of those. But very important to note that depending on where the teen is at developmentally, their tasks, the developmental tasks, might be compromised when they are grieving. This is an image that I wanted to share with you of a teen that I worked with recently. Her father had died, and she was struggling with, I asked her, I said, what is this like for you? What is this? You're experiencing grief. Can you explain what the grief feels like for you? What is it like? And she couldn't find words for it, which is not something that is uncommon for teens. That's why taking more of expressive therapies approach is very helpful for teens. So I asked her to select from a group of figures that I had for use in a sand tray. I said, can you maybe find one of those figures that represent what you're feeling inside with your grief? And this is the image that she chose, this figure here of Bridge. And when I asked her to describe what this is, how this conveys her sense of loss, she said that she was standing in the middle of this bridge, looking forward to her adulthood and looking back to her childhood. And when she looked back to her childhood, she had memories of her father. And she didn't want to let those go. But she felt also that as she was looking ahead to adulthood, she had to move forward, but she didn't want to. So she felt like she was being pulled in two different directions, which I felt really, really signifies what we're talking about here, the struggle that teens have in a developmental perspective. So we're talking basically about this tug of war of, well, we could say maybe a tug of war between the brain and the heart. So there's a push and pull between maturing or remaining immature, seeking distancing from parents or fearing that separation from their attachment figures, achieving independence versus remaining independent, seeking peers for approval and belonging or avoiding them, and even sometimes isolating. So in terms of behaviors, we could see self-protective behaviors like as a means of seeking predictability in their lives, or being adventurous and taking risks. We could see mastery of their situation, or they might fall back into learned helplessness. Academic involvement, or its opposite, total loss of care about schoolwork. And I got to just say, just the other day, I was working with another teen, and I was asking him, what does he notice that he's struggling with now in his grief? And he said, I just can't focus on my schoolwork. I just can't really concentrate on it. I don't want to do it. And I asked him if he knew what that might be all about. And he said, I just don't think it means anything anymore. I just don't think it's real. And it was really interesting because he had been mentioning every time I asked about his grief, his loss of his parent, he kept saying, I just don't feel like it's real. I just can't believe it's actually happened. And that experience of how he's responding to his loss seems to be spilling out into other aspects of his world, where he's trying to make sense of a world where his parent has died. So other things, he just doesn't seem real to him. It could be denying the importance of the person who died, or the opposite, idealizing them. So not unlike some of the aspects that we see in children and adults, but maybe more profoundly in teens, these could be more pivotal points in their expressions of grief. Adult perception of teen grief. Now, this is pretty important that we pause for a moment to consider that we've all been there, haven't we? I mean, we've all been teens. And if we look back, we could probably conjure up some memories, good or bad, of being teenagers. But it is important to stop there and say that is not something that we can then say, well, now I understand what it's like to be a teen. You understand what it's like to be a teen for yourself, what your experience was like, but we can't extrapolate and say that all teens experience the adolescence as we did. So I think it's really important to pause for a moment to consider what is our perception of teen and teen grief. So adults may struggle to know how to communicate with teens in the sense of relatability, because yeah, I was once a teen, but I'm not a teen now. So I have to really take responsibility and remind myself that I don't know what it's like to be a teen at all. So, and this could lead, if you're not careful with this, it could lead to misunderstanding of the teen's experience, and it could be interpreted as judgment, understandably. And if a teen feels like they're being judged or criticized in some way, they may be very sensitive to that, and they may pull away from that offer of support. When we hide death and grief from teens to protect them, as some people do with children, and they do as well with teens, we deprive them of the opportunity to learn about life and themselves. And I think that's a really important thing to pause and consider the opportunity for growth and learning that loss presents. Adults may fear talking about something that they find frightening themselves, and this could result in unhelpful messages that the teen may get. If they see that there's some avoidance, well, maybe it's not okay to talk about this, or maybe I shouldn't even be thinking about these things. It's not okay. We don't want to give those messages to teens at all. Interesting, in a recent research that was done on teachers, they found that teachers felt helpless and confused, overloaded emotionally, and anxious when it came to responding to students in their class that they knew who were grieving. It kind of brought them up to that precipice for themselves, and they went, I don't think I really want to go there. I don't feel safe going there. So adults may avoid talking about death and grief because they find they need to have the correct answers. And I put in there, no one does. You know, you're not going to have the correct answers. You're not always going to have the right answers. And it's not about having answers. It's more about giving space to that teen who's grieving and allowing them to express what that experience is like for them. So right away, we take that sense of responsibility to have the right answers off of our shoulders, and that creates space to be available to support them. So some more adult assumptions about grief. They have support from family and friends. Well, those who are primary supports of a teen may also be grieving. We can't assume that family and friends are available. I mean, there might be a lot of reasons why they're not. Families always grieve together. Well, not always. And we're not talking about dysfunctional families that won't grieve together, families that have other stressors happening in their lives. These could be families that would normally be there for one another. But when grief enters a family, each individual in that family will be grieving in their own way for that person, because each person had a unique relationship with the person who died. There's no emotional expression happening here, so therefore there must be no struggle that this teen is going through. Well, we do understand that emotional development is coming online inside the brain for a teenager. So there could be a lot of confusion about what are they feeling, how do I express articulate. Again, so many teens that I've worked with, they say, I just don't know what to think. I just feel numb. Well, they're all grown up. They can handle this. Not really. They are still pioneers in a world of new experiences. They've had fairly limited experience up to this point. So yeah, they're doing the best they can, and they have a lot of resiliency, their own inner strengths that they could draw upon, but they're not at the point of having enough life experience to really make sense or connect all the dots, perhaps. Sudden deaths are more traumatic. Expected deaths are less impactful. This is not always the case. So we don't want to make assumptions that if a child or teen experiences the death of a loved one, a long expected terminal illness, that they will be or even traumatized by that. Research shows that even expected deaths could be very traumatizing for children and teens. Can't help but take a look at guilt here. It's very important. We have a need to find cause for impactful events in our life. So if we look at what is the source of guilt, this could be one area to explore. If the impactful event was positive, well, we want to increase that. We want to make more of that happen. If it was negative, well, we want to decrease that. We want to do what we can to minimize that. So this might put us into a place where we may start taking on some responsibility, as if we feel like we could control some of these impactful events. This brings up, obviously, the challenge of guilt. Teens may still hold an unconscious belief that they have greater influence in the world around them than they really do. This is something that children hold, certainly, what we call magical thinking, that they have an effect, that they directly affect things that happen in the world, and therefore they are the cause of what happens in their world. They don't understand that they don't cause these things. And even into adulthood, adults even struggle with this, and certainly teens may be dealing with that. Because normal development involves pushing the parents away, this might create guilt if a parent dies. Okay, now we've got to look at attachment. This is something that's going on in any situation when we look at grief. Grief and attachment are so, firmly connected that we always got to consider the role that attachment plays. Attachment being an emotional bond with another person. We're born with it. It's something that's innate in us to form attachments with caregivers. It starts with primarily our caregivers and extends out to other members of our social circle. These bonds have evolved from child-parent relationships to friend, partner, family. But what we do know is that attachment, it's all about biological survival. With less, what we find is that humans who maintained a proximity to an attachment figure were more likely to survive to adulthood. It's just part of nature. So it's something that's a very powerful part of what motivates human behavior. And if we go into the chemistry behind, we find that this loving family here, look at all of the chemical interactions that are happening inside of their brains. We have these dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. Those are powerful chemicals that play a very important role promoting bonding patterns between people. They create desire for further contact with the individuals that incite the release of those chemicals. So that's what brings us together and binds us together in a very powerful way. And there's even opioids, the pleasure hormones, they're natural morphine-like chemicals that are created in our bodies. And they reduce pain awareness and create feelings of elation. They are especially induced when there's touch, when there's social contact and touch. It creates this feel-good feeling inside of us. So very powerful chemistry that's behind attachment, and it's certainly going on inside of the brain of a teenager when they're grieving. Because let's say we have a tap turning off of the dopamine and the oxytocin inside the brain, because that attachment figure that provided that through that connection, through that touch, is suddenly gone. This is what results: cortisol, adrenaline in the body instead of having those other chemicals. It's replaced. And the outcome is anxiety and with grief. So we're looking then at grief, and we're looking at the chemistry of it. It's like grief as withdrawal. Because believe it or not, we crave social connections in the same region of our brains where we crave food. That, to me, suggests it's as important as food is to our survival as human beings. If it's in that part of the brain, that means something's telling us it's vitally important to our survival. So people will talk about how they have aches and pains. How it's not just an emotional pain, but it can actually be a physical pain in their body when they're grieving. And when we look at the chemistry of it, well, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So we're looking at a new landscape of experiential learning. The brain is learning. It's experiencing the death of someone close to us pushes us to the edge of life experience. We have a map of what we understand, of who we are, how we understand who we are, how we understand how we connect with others, and how we understand how we navigate through the world around us. But when grief happens, this pushes us, like I like to imagine, right to the edge of that map, into an uncharted part of that territory. We don't have a map as we step forward into that other part. That is the experiential learning part of grief, where now we have to figure it out. I mean, there's a lot of books been written on it. A lot of people have researched this, but ultimately the individual has to figure that out for themselves. They have to draw that map for themselves. Grief influences our philosophy of life. A bereaved teen might be facing this earlier than in life with less experience to draw upon. People who have had many decades of experience, maybe they've had other losses, they kind of have a philosophy of life, perhaps, that they may know that they're drawing upon it, or they don't know they're drawing upon it, but they do have it. But teens haven't been able to really develop that yet. They're just in the early stages of figuring that out. So a mature conception of death that starts to form at the threshold of adolescence: universality, non-functionality, and irreversibility. Those three key things about death that children don't really have a firm grasp of, and teens have developed it, but they're just at the point of developing it. So let's look at the tensions between the reality and magical thinking when it comes to these different concepts. Universality. Yes, it happens to everyone. I understand that, the teen may say, but it just doesn't seem real. I don't feel that it will ever happen to me. I mean, I'm young. I have this thriving vitality in me. But what if it happens to another family member? Now that I see that it can happen. Irreversibility. Yes, I know it can't be undone. Once a person has died, they're not coming back, but that doesn't seem to make sense when I'm feeling so alive about myself, and I see video games and movies that deny this. That, I mean, you die in a video game and you come back again. Non-functionality. Yes, I know the body stops working, but is there something that keeps going afterwards? I wonder. So three major concepts for teens that they struggle with as they are starting to form their understanding of themselves and the world around them. Now we're going to look at 5 core issues of teen grief. The predictability of events. Research indicates that bereaved teens have greater anxiety and fear than their non-bereaved peers when it comes to predictability of the future. Mastery and control. Bereaved adolescents believed that they had less control over what happened to them than their non-bereaved peers. Belonging, this powerful social influence here. It's bereaved teens had more social problems and were socially withdrawn. Research also notes that in terms of fairness and justice, bereaved teens more frequently referenced the unfulfilled life. They couldn't help but look at their friends and compare themselves with the tremendous pain that they were feeling, that their family was experiencing, and saying, why did this happen to us? This seems so unfair. And the development of self-image. Bereaved teens were more likely to believe that their conduct and performance in school was not as good as their peers. But interestingly, they felt that they were more mature than their non-bereaved peers, probably because they've been pushed to the edge of that landscape of experience, and they're going where their peers had never gone before. Self-image, of course, is something that we can't neglect when we look at the experience of teens. They are in that period of very sensitive development of their self-image. Social identity is something that is always going to be top of mind for their awareness. There could be a perception of being different, being highlighted when they're a grieving teen. You know, they might be the only one in their class who has lost a family member. They might be the only one in their grade that has lost a family member. And that might make them feel very strange and different from everybody else. Adolescents are more open to trying on different behaviors and appearances to discover who they are. So I think that's a really interesting point because this opens up opportunity for them. I mean, we see this exhibited maybe through style, through choice of music, through different activities that they might get involved in. They explore a lot of different things. This might be an area that could help them in their grief. Grief contributes to personal growth in teens. So this comes out of a research study that was done in Australia in 2018. They found that life lessons included increased appreciation of life and relationships, and often reinforced by a discovered awareness of the fragility and impermanence of life and an increased empathy or compassion for others. So something that teens experienced as a result of grief. The theme of self-care included increased self-awareness, self-confidence, self-reliance, and self-care for their own mental health. That seemed to be more important for teens who are grieving. And basically a broader feeling of resilience to handle difficult situations. So some positive indicators here of experiences that teens can have when they're grieving. So let's look at a framework to help the grieving teen. You got to look at the nature of the prior attachment to the deceased person. That's going to be very important. What was the relationship like? How did that person die? And what else was happening in that teen's life? Coping strategies that the teen has learned to use in the past, perhaps, could be very useful. The developmental situation of the youth. Are they in that early, middle, or late adolescent development? What are the tasks as part of that? And the availability and nature of support that the teen has to draw upon. We found that one of the key aspects of helping a teen was to have the availability of a parent. Maybe it was a surviving parent if one of the parents died. That seemed to be a really key factor in the ability of the teen to go through their grief journey. I wanted to share a picture of that a teen did in an expressive art therapy session some years ago, just to indicate some of the issues that the teen might be working on. Here we see an invasion of aliens. So that kind of signifies the turmoil, something that came out of nowhere. They don't understand where this came from, the death of a parent in their life. We see the reference to the home, a place where they may have recalled seeing their parent in a palliative situation laying in their bedroom. A cross image, which to me signifies the acknowledgement of the death of their loved one, but a little bit of magical thinking in here. The wishful thinking of, I wish I could have changed this. I wish I could use my magic wand to make this all different. A reference to the teen as self, with a word strong, with an arrow pointing down to this interesting looking figure here. Not to belabor too much of this, just to kind of show how teens will use symbology instead of using verbal words all the time to express their grief. Very curious image of what looks like a dragon playing poker or some sort of game of chance. I'm not sure, but one can read all kinds of symbology into that. So when working with teens, I think it's really important to have an eclectic approach to be able to work with music, poetry, art, beading, dance, any kind of form that doesn't rely on a verbal expression. So let's look briefly at some research studies. We know that increased anxiety, depression, and worries up to 2 years following a parent's death is part of the grieving experience for teens. There's a changed perception of the self. Bereaved teens felt that their schoolwork and their conduct overall to be inferior to that of their peers. So a lot of social sensitivity there. Disruptions in their social world, problems with interpersonal relationships, withdrawal from friends, and feeling different from their peers. That is a big, constant struggle that teens have, probably without grief being part of the scene. But when grief enters, it exacerbates that. During the second year of bereavement, adolescents they reported feeling less in control of their lives compared to their non-bereaved peers. And bereaved adolescents showed no difference in delinquency, expressions of anger, or frequency of, okay, some more research. This focused on bereaved girls. They reported that more anxiety than bereaved boys, interestingly, as well as greater sensitivity over family tensions, especially in cases where it was the mother who had died. We highlighted that, we've seen that highlighted as a especially prominent risk for teens, grieving girls who lost a mother. Over time, bereaved males' anxiety and depression lessened. Without intervention, the anxiety and depression for girls, however, increased. Without intervention, acting out behavior decreased for bereaved boys over time, but it decreased for girls only who were part of an intervention program. Bereaved female youth exhibit externalizing and internalizing symptoms more than male youth. Interesting. And parentally bereaved teens scored higher on the depression scale. Risk of self-harm and suicide definitely has to be considered when we're talking about grieving teens. Losing a parent through bereavement in early life has been shown to be a risk for both suicide and self-harm in young people. Survivor guilt is a big part of that, whether it's because of actions taken or not taken, may result in self-harm and suicidal ideation and substance use. Teen grief support groups. We do those when we have an opportunity at the Peace Arch Hospice Society. I found that they've been extremely useful when there is a group of teens who are grieving, especially if it's grieving for the same person. One example of this was a few years ago. There was a group of teens ranging between the ages of 14 and 18. They were all males. They were bonding over after-school activities and shared interests. So they were already a cohesive group. The older ones were looking out for the younger ones in this group. I like to see that there was a range of support for them. However, very tragically, one of the younger youths in this group was murdered in a swarming. We were called to go into the school to support this group of teen boys because they were literally going off the rails. They were getting into trouble. There was a lot of fear of their risky behaviors. A lot of anger. That's what I saw when I started working with them. I saw there was a lot of anger. So on my way to work one day, I stopped at the Brick and I got the biggest cardboard box that I could find in the dumpster. And I took it to the school. We set it up in the gymnasium. They were given an opportunity to write whatever words they wanted to about the grief on the box. And they were given a baseball bat and they were given turns hitting that box as hard as they wanted to. And as you see in the one picture at the bottom there, they pretty much shredded it into a bunch of little pieces. A group of boys that they didn't really want to talk about the grief so much, but they needed to express the energy, the anger that was inside of them. So some of the quotes from this group, it was hard at the start because we had to think about what happened. They didn't want to think about it, and that made it hard. But they felt relief in knowing that everyone feels the same and how to handle things. And also it's nice to have an hour dedicated to talking about it. And they said, we have a really large, tight friend group and we shouldn't take it for granted. Let's talk about factors promoting adolescent resiliency following a parental death. These are the things that when you're working with a teen, you want to focus on. So hope and trust in the future, realistic, balanced appraisal of personal strengths and limitations. It's important for the teen to highlight that for themselves. Goals that can be attained, attainable goals that they could feel some mastery over. Internal locus of control, so they're not always giving up their autonomy to external forces. Peer relationship skills, problem-solving skills, emotional regulation, valued by others, that sense of belonging, outgoing and responsive temperament, self-esteem and self-efficacy, continuing bond with the parent who died, able to accept the surviving parents entering into a new relationship, which may be a struggle for some teens. So pretty important factors to note regarding how teens find resiliency when they're grieving. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I thought it would be interesting to note that we do recognize that teens use social media. It's important for them. Many of us who are older might consider ourselves digital immigrants. We came as immigrants to the digital world of social media, but teens are natives. They're born into it. So it's important for them. And some of the things that can happen in online shrines, memorialized accounts in Instagram or Facebook, and they might even be playlisting grief. The power of music as they share their music lists. I see that is an important part of working with a teen, is ask them what music is important to them, what choice, what songs convey what they're feeling inside. Just a quick snapshot here of the most common online platforms for teens, based on a 2023 study. Supporting grieving teens, referrals to other supportive services, supporting them to make those connections. I think that's an integral part of helping a teen, to help them to expand their social supports. Concerns about immediate security that they may have, the parental stuff happening at home, finances, their academic struggles, social struggles. Supporting the family is going to be very important, because we know that families that are well supported will increase that support for grief for the teen. Continuing bonds with the deceased person through storytelling, memorializing, or expressive arts, certainly something that's I find is very helpful when working with teens. Although that's not something that they all have to do. Some of them might enjoy doing that and others might not. The developmental changes over time. Teens will re-grieve the loss as they reach those new developmental stages and tackle those new tasks. So I think it's important to recognize that teens will return for grief support years later, and that's something that I always encourage them to let them know that's available for them. Don't try to fix. This is something that nobody can fix, and it's not about fixing it when it comes to loss. But be available, and I say always and in every way. So being available always and in every way, being flexible in how we're available. Teens might not want to sit down and face-to-face talk about their feelings, but they might want to toss a football back and forth. And you never know what amazing conversation will come out of that. They might want to play a board game like I did just the other day with a teen, and then he was able to tell me some things about how he misses his father. So be flexible, be adaptable, find out what's important for the teen and try to meet them there. And intervene when destructive behaviors occur, as they may or may not, but it's important to take interventions if that happens. A teen needs support in that. Just a quick note about a Good Grief Teen education program that we have, not for teens who are grieving, but for teens that want to learn about grief and how to help others who are grieving. So I find that this is a very popular program that we run for teens. They learn about grief, about self-awareness. And they tell me, like, why don't we learn this in school? This stuff is really important. So, which tells me that maybe one day it might be part of the curriculum. I think it should be. Hope and resiliency. 96% of teen subjects identified at least one positive outcome of grief. And I think this is a really important thing to leave off with here today, because when we think about grief, we just think it's all doom and gloom and it's all chaos, disorder. But what we find is that it can be an opportunity of growth and learning for a teen. So I love that number. 96% said that there was at least one positive outcome that came out from grief. Tensions, finding the balance. Here we are back at this tightrope image. We're moving from simplicity to sophistication, from dependence to independence. And the adult's role is to help them maintain a balance, to be on hand, but not to hold their hand while they're walking that tightrope. I know that was a lot of information. I thank you very much for being so attentive, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions that any of you might have. Or hear any comments, what your experience working with teens has been like.
Thank you, Trevor, so much for the presentation. Yeah, we could take one question probably before we have to start wrapping up. But yeah, so if there is someone who wants to ask a question, a few of mine, I'll give you this first. Jane.
Hi, thanks. I'm going to be working with a group of teens who have just experienced a traumatic death amongst their peers. And they are also traumatized because they were involved directly in the death. And so I'm just wondering if you have any kind of thoughts. We're going to be doing a group for them, just for, like you said, a very close-knit group of friends who are all involved in the same death. So we're going to be running them. I'm just curious if you have any, how you work with trauma in a group like that.
Yeah, right away there's a shared traumatic experience here. They're all grieving for the loss of someone that was important for them, and it's very tragic. I think giving teens ownership of a group like that is important, to let them know that this is their group, but to do things functionally that really indicate that they're not going to come to a group and they're going to be told what to do, or they're going to be instructed. I mean, they want some framework perhaps, because it's going to be a new experience, and they're going to need to be guided in that perhaps. But to let them have ownership of it, that will help them. I mean, this must have been a terrible experience for them where they felt completely out of control. This gives them some control, and allows them to guide you and each other in towards what is going to work for them, what is going to help them, giving them opportunities to do both verbal sharing, but also nonverbal sharing, different activities. I would, whenever I work with children or with teens, I always really do hold back. As much as I might want to move forward into some supportive interventions that I believe would be helpful, I like to hold back and just kind of very safe for them, and let them take more of a lead on where it goes from there.
Okay, thanks so much.
Welcome.
I also like, yeah, it was great. I'm learning so much. I wish we had more time for questions. And I also liked how you found a way, just personally, to work through the people's anger. You know, like I know it's, even with as an adult, it's weird dealing with anger. But that box idea, to be able to get that out was so great, and it's cheap. You don't need to buy a boxing bag. You just get a go dumpster diving and get a get a box and write grief. I think that was such a very useful technique. And so
Definitely.
I know a couple of questions. Any yeah, any thoughts on hard to reach teens? I support kids at a camp experiencing loss ages 11 to 18. Any strategies?
So hard to reach teens that are difficult to form connections with, or yeah, that it's I think that for a lot of teens there might be this sense of the unknown, or they don't understand what this is or what it might be. So of course, they might say, well, why would I want to participate in something like this? So it's really important to give them some information about what the expectations might be, but package that in such a way that it's open, and it alleviates some of the fear that they might have, or the hesitation that might arise for them to participate in something that they don't really know or understand. So giving them some idea of what it might be about, and I know it's going to sound really trite, but including food is going to be always important. It seems to be an important part of any group that we do, but we don't want to neglect how important that shared experience of sharing food together has. And having teens share music, ask them to come in and share some songs, like, so something that they can feel is for them, something that they could feel they can relate to, so it doesn't seem so foreign to them.
Amazing. And quickly, I know we're running out of time, but I do want to get to people's questions because it's maybe important to what the work they're doing. And so Rhonda says here in the chat, how would teens react to a critical incident debriefing?
Yeah, I think it's, I've seen it where teens have been really open and very verbally expressive, and I've seen it where they've been very quiet and not saying much at all. I find that if there's one or two teens in the room that are a little bit more inclined to start to share verbally, they can, kind of inspires others to start sharing too. And I think again, it all comes down to that feeling of safety, um, feeling of this is an open space for them and it's their space. Give them ownership of it, and then be very attentive to how much information is appropriate, how much the teens are aware of, or um, there's been situations where we might not understand what everybody knows in terms of something tragic, a traumatic situation that's happened. So again, I always like to open the space, but to let them take the lead and encourage them to take the lead on it.
That's great. And last question, Katie.
Thanks for letting me take some time here. I am an adult who experienced teen grief. Both my parents passed away a year apart from one another when I was in high school. And at that time, the guidance counselors, I don't think that anyone really knew what to do at that point. And so someone was brought in whom I'd never met before. And I was it was a situation where I was like pulled out of class to go see this woman. And I don't think that kind of structure at all really does work. So it really, what you're saying about having the child or the teen lead the group is so important, because a negative impact of um, support could lead to distance in seeking out therapeutic modalities. I didn't truly seek out assistance in dealing with my grief until 10 years later. But something that was critical for me at that time was the need to fit in with peers. And that piece of feeling isolated from the norm, like all teenagers want to fit in. So anything that is just a channel, just allowing for a thread for that person to know that there is a space to talk about it, but not kind of in front of others, to be pulled out of class or something of that sort. It's adding to that isolation. So yeah, being it just yeah, I really it resonates when you say just to have an offering, a space, and have it be led by the individual. I think that allows for a positive association with therapy and with counseling, as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to talk about this thing, whether you're ready for it or not. So thanks for really reiterating that fact, because I think a lot of people feel like they need to come in and fix, especially with our youth, but allowing them to be in the driver's seat is super important. So thank you for that, Trevor.
Well, you're welcome, Katie. And the term that comes to my mind is the not knowing approach. I go into this, I want to learn what this experience is like for this teen. I don't know, and I think by putting all of that off to the side and approaching with an openness like that, it will help the teen to feel confident that, okay, maybe this person is here for me, and I don't have to say anything I don't want to say. That's one thing I always tell children and teens when we first start working together. I say, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say. You don't want to, if you don't want to talk about something, you're in control here. You're in total control.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Trevor, for coming in and raising awareness on teen grief. And so we're going to put the same poll up again that we did in the beginning, just to sort of see if anything's changed. Hopefully, I know it has for me. So it just gives us confidence that what we're doing is educational in nature.
Good.
And so I'll just wrap up the session now. And so we just really, once again, hope you enjoyed the session. And when you close your Zoom, there's gonna be a survey that's gonna pop up. We ask you to fill that out if we can, and we always share that with our presenter. And so a registration for the next series is going to be on grief in the workplace. And so it's scheduled for June 25th. And you'll see that link in the chat box. And to be notified of any new sessions that we have, you can subscribe to our newsletter or visit the center's website on any kind of upcoming ECHO sessions. And we always try to provide the presentation recording, any kind of notes, anything else within 7 working days. So just, watch out for your email for that information. And thank you again just for attending and being here and letting us know that you're wanting to improve and increase your knowledge in grief and bereavement. I think for me, it's always a positive sign to see so many people coming in and just wanting to learn. And I think we're in a culture now that people are wanting to learn, and we have experts all over the area willing to teach. So thank you so much, Trevor, again, for coming on and teaching us a little bit about what you know, because I know you know so much more.
Thank you very much. It was an honor to be here today. Thank you.